the struggling mother. The air of the alien market was heavy with strange smells and louder voices. Hundreds of creatures from many worlds moved through the narrow streets. Bright lights flashed from shop signs and colorful fabrics hung from the aisle. Stalls dot in the middle of this busy place stood a thin alien woman. She held a small bundle close to her chest, her baby. Her skin was pale blue, with faint silver lines that glowed weakly. Her big black eyes looked around with quiet desperation. Her name was Lyra, and she was a Zera, one of the poorest species on this planet. Lyra's baby coughed weakly in her arms. His tiny face was too pale, and his breathing was shallow. She tightened the cloth around him to keep him warm, but she could feel his body shaking. She stepped forward and spoke softly to a merchant. "Please, my baby is sick. Can you help me? Just a little medicine, please." The merchant, a tall, golden-skinned alien, looked down at her with disgust. "You cannot pay," he said coldly. "Go away. Don't touch my stall." Lyra backed away, whispering an apology. Her baby coughed again. She moved to another stall and begged again, and then another. But everywhere she went, the answer was the same. No one wanted to help a Zera. Some people shook their heads and walked away. Others muttered to each other, "Why does she even try? Her kind is hopeless. That baby won't survive. Better to let it go." Pathetic creatures, always begging. The words stung, but Lyra kept going. She had no choice. Finally, she reached the door of a clinic, a smooth white building with a glowing red cross above it. She stepped inside, clutching her baby tighter. The air was cleaner here, and the lights were soft. A doctor, tall, with green skin and long fingers, looked up from his desk. "Yes?" he asked. "Please," Lyra said, almost whispering. "My baby. He's very sick. I have no money, but—" The doctor cut her off with a sharp wave of his hand. "And you waste my time," he said. "We do not treat those who cannot pay, especially not your kind, out." Lyra's heart sank. She opened her mouth to argue, but no sound came out. Her baby gave a weak little cry, as if he too knew it was hopeless. The doctor turned away and called for a guard. "Show her out," he said. 2 guards appeared and roughly pushed her back into the street. The door closed behind her with a loud click. Outside, the rain had started. Cold, thin drops fell from the dark sky. The bright lights of the market now looked blurry and harsh through the rain. Lyra stumbled to a quiet corner, sank to her knees, and hugged her baby close to her chest. She rocked him gently and whispered to him, "Just hold on, my little star, just hold on." But she knew his little breaths were getting weaker. A group of alien children ran past her, laughing and playing. They splashed through the puddles without even seeing her. A merchant shouted at them to stop, but no one noticed Lyra sitting there in the mud dot. She looked up at the sky, rain running down her face. "Is there no one?" she murmured. "Is there no one who will help me?" For a moment, she thought the sky itself answered. Because a shadow fell over her dot at first, she didn't look up. Just another stranger passing by, she thought. But then a voice spoke. "You need help?" It was a deep, calm voice. Lyra blinked the rain from her eyes and looked up. Standing in front of her was a man, not an alien, but a human. He wore a dark jacket and heavy boots, and his face was partly hidden by the hood of his coat. Even so, she could see his strange, pale skin and sharp features. His eyes, though, were kind. For a moment, she didn't know what to say. Humans were rare here. She had only seen them from far away. They usually stayed on their ships or inside the human quarters. You are human," she whispered. He crouched down in front of her. The rain dripped from his hood, but he didn't seem to care. "Yes," he said. "Name's Jack. You need help?" Lyra hesitated. Why would a human care? Why would anyone care? But Jack waited, silent and steady. Finally, Lyra spoke. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. My baby, he is very sick. They all said no. Everyone said no. Jack looked down at the tiny baby. The little one coughed, and his small hand clutched at his mother's shirt. Jack took a slow breath and stood up. Come on, he said. We'll figure something out. Lyra stared at him. But why? Jack glanced back at her and gave a small, crooked smile. Because no one else will. He held out his hand to her. Lyra looked at his hand for a long moment. Then she took it. Dot, as they walked into the rain. The market behind them kept buzzing and flashing. But for Lyra, the world felt a little less cold. Asterisk the refusal. Rain was still falling when Lyra followed Jack through the twisting streets. Human walked ahead with steady steps, his boots splashing through puddles. Lyra clutched her baby and hurried to keep up. For the first time all day, someone was walking with her, and yet she couldn't shake the fear crawling in her chest. Why was he helping? Why did he care? They stopped under the broken roof of an abandoned shop. Jack pulled his hood down and finally looked at her properly. His face was hard and serious, but not unkind. What's the baby's name? He asked. Lyra swallowed. Soren, she whispered. Jack nodded. He crouched down, brushed a finger against Soren's tiny hand. The baby was burning hot, his breath shallow. He's very sick, Jack said. I've seen this before. Without medicine, he won't make it through the night. Lyra hugged Soren closer, her throat tight. I tried. They all said no. They said my kind. She stopped, ashamed to even finish the sentence. Jack stood up slowly, his eyes dark. Yeah, he muttered. Figured as much. That's how they are around here. Lyra dared to ask. But you are human. You don't even know me. Why? Why help me? Jack looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he said simply, because no one else will. Lyra blinked, confused and grateful at the same time. But just then, a voice echoed from behind them. You shouldn't be here, human. They both turned. In the shadows stood two tall aliens with sharp armor and glowing staffs. They were city enforcers, the kind who patrolled the streets and kept order. Jack straightened and faced them calmly. What do you want? He asked. One of the guards stepped closer. Leave her human. She's nothing. You don't belong here. Lyra froze, clutching her baby tightly. But Jack didn't move. Instead, he took a slow step toward the guards. His voice stayed calm but cold. You leave her alone, he said. The guards sneered. Or what? You'll fight us? Jack's hand rested on his belt, where a small, strange-looking tool hung. His eyes were sharp, and for a moment the guards hesitated. Finally, they muttered something under their breath and walked away. When they were gone, Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Jack turned back to her. They won't bother you again tonight. But we don't have much time. Time? She asked, confused. Jack knelt down beside her. Listen, I asked around before. There's a cure for what he's got. But it's not in the city. It's out there. He pointed toward the horizon. Far away, past the lights of the city, stood a dark line of trees, the Forbidden Forest. The sight of it made Lyra's stomach turn. The Forbidden Forest? She whispered. Jack nodded. That's where the cure grows. A flower. Rare. Dangerous to get, but it's the only chance he's got. Lyra shook her head, horrified. No. You don't understand. No one comes back from there. People say monsters live in those woods. They say the forest eats anyone who enters. Jack's mouth curled into a small, dry smile. Sounds about right, he said. She stared at him in disbelief. "You can't. You'll die." But Jack just stood, adjusting the strap on his shoulder and looking out at the distant forest. "If that's what it takes," he said, "then so be it." Lyra grabbed his sleeve, her voice breaking. "But why? Why risk your life for us?" "I don't understand." Jack looked down at her, and for the first time she thought she saw something sad, something heavy in his eyes. "Because," he said softly, "someone once risked their life for me, and I couldn't save them. Maybe this time I can." She let go of his sleeve slowly, unable to speak. He crouched in front of her again, his eyes level with hers. "Stay here," he said firmly. "Don't move from this spot. Keep the baby warm. I'll be back before dawn." Lyra felt her heart pound painfully in her chest. "No," she said suddenly. "Please, don't go. You don't even know how dangerous it is. No flower is worth." Jack shook his head gently but firmly. "He is," he said, nodding toward Soren. "He's worth it." With that, he turned and started walking away. Lyra stood frozen, watching his figure grow smaller and smaller in the rain. Her hands trembled as she held Soren close. The lights of the market flickered behind her. The dark forest loomed ahead, its edges alive with strange, shifting shadows. Somewhere deep inside, she wanted to scream for him to stop, to come back, but all she could do was whisper after him, "Please, come back alive." The rain fell harder now. The air seemed colder, the street quieter, and somewhere out there, in the darkness, Jack was already walking toward the forest, where no one dared to go. Lyra pressed her lips to her baby's forehead, feeling his fever burn hotter. She closed her eyes, whispering a prayer to stars she wasn't sure still listened, a prayer for a human she didn't understand, and a baby she couldn't save on her own. The impossible task, the forest, stood like a wall of blackness in front of Jack. Even from a distance, he could feel its strange presence, the way the air grew colder, heavier, and almost alive as he got closer. Behind him, the lights of the city were faint and far now, swallowed by the dark sky and falling rain. Ahead, the forbidden forest opened like a great mouth, waiting to swallow him too. He tightened the strap of his pack and stepped forward. The ground at the edge was soft and wet, and the air smelled of earth and something faintly metallic. He pushed past the first line of twisted trees. Their branches curled down like claws, brushing his shoulders as if trying to pull him back. It was quiet. Too quiet. Even the rain seemed to stop as soon as he crossed into the forest. Jack paused, listening. Somewhere deep inside, he could hear faint whispers, voices too soft to understand. Maybe it was just the wind. Maybe not. He pressed on. The path was barely visible. Roots snaked across the ground, and the undergrowth glowed faintly in patches. Strange blue and green fungi, lighting his way. Jack moved carefully, remembering what little he had heard about this place. People called it cursed. They said no one who entered ever returned. Some claimed the forest was alive, that it watched and tested everyone who dared step inside. And yet, here he was. Every so often, he stopped to check the old data chip in his pocket. It showed the rough direction to the crystal flower, the rare plant that could save Soren. But the path grew harder. The whispers grew louder. After an hour of walking, Jack came to his first obstacle. A river. It cut through the forest, wide and fast, its black water full of jagged rocks. There was no bridge. On the far bank, he could see faint light, a sign. The flower's area was closer. He scanned the river and spotted a series of stones sticking out, just enough to cross. Taking a deep breath, Jack stepped onto the first stone. The water roared below him. The stones were slick. Halfway across, something moved under the surface, a dark shape gliding just below him. He froze. The shape circled, then rose. Two glowing eyes broke the surface. It was some kind of river beast, long and black, with teeth like broken glass. Jack waited, his body still as stone. The creature hissed, circling, but then, as if losing interest, it sank back into the dark. Jack took the chance and leapt to the last stone, landing safely on the far side. He allowed himself one deep breath before moving on, deeper into the forest. The trees grew closer, the air thicker. At some point, he realized he was being followed. At first, it was just a feeling, a faint crunch of leaves behind him, a shadow darting between the trunks. Jack stopped suddenly and spun around, pulling out the small stun blade he carried. Nothing. But then, a flicker of movement above. He looked up, just in time to see something leap from the branches toward him, all claws and teeth. He rolled to the side as the creature landed where he'd been standing. It was big, fast, and covered in dark fur. Its eyes glowed red, and its mouth dripped with thick saliva. Jack didn't wait. He swung his blade, slashing at its arm. Sparks flew where the blade cut, and the beast shrieked. It lunged again, knocking him into the mud. For a moment, Jack thought this was it. But then he noticed the creature's eyes, wild but afraid. He realized something. It wasn't attacking to kill. It was testing him. Jack slowly got to his feet, blade still ready. He stood tall, not moving toward it, but not backing away either. The creature stared at him, its breath hot and heavy. Then, with a final hiss, it turned and disappeared into the darkness. Jack let out a shaky breath and kept walking. His body was sore, his clothes torn, but his spirit was steady. He had come this far. He wouldn't stop now. Finally, hours later, he saw it. A clearing opened ahead. Bathed in faint silver light. In the center grew a single flower. Its petals were like crystal, glowing softly. The crystal flower. Jack approached carefully. As soon as he stepped into the clearing, the air grew colder. The whispers returned, louder now. He reached for the flower, and suddenly the ground cracked. A deep voice, ancient and angry, spoke from nowhere. You do not belong here. The earth shook. Black vines shot up around him, wrapping around his legs and arms. Jack struggled, cutting at them with his blade, but more came. He gritted his teeth, forcing himself forward, inch by inch. Not leaving without it, he growled. Through clenched teeth, the vines tightened, but Jack kept pushing. Finally, with a last burst of strength, he grabbed the flower and tore it free. The vines shrieked and fell away. The whispers stopped. The forest went silent. Jack stood there, panting, the flower glowing in his hand. For a long moment, he just stared at it. Then, slowly, he smiled. Got it, he murmured. But as he turned to leave, he noticed something strange. The forest behind him was shifting. The path he came from was gone, swallowed by darkness. The forest wasn't finished with him yet. Clutching the flower tight, Jack took a deep breath and stepped back into the trees, ready to face whatever came next. The forbidden forest. Escape and monsters. Jack stood at the edge of the clearing, the crystal flower clutched tightly in his hand. Its glow lit his face with a soft silver light. But his eyes were fixed on the forest ahead, or what should have been the forest. The path he had followed to reach here was gone. In its place stood a wall of shifting black trees, branches twisting and moving as though alive. The air grew colder, and the silence was thick and heavy. Jack took a breath and whispered to himself, not over yet. He tightened his grip on the flower, slid his blade back into its sheath, and stepped forward. The forest seemed to watch. The first few steps were easy enough, but the further he walked, the stranger things became. The ground beneath him pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. The trees whispered his name in voices that sounded both familiar and alien. Jack. Jack. He ignored them. But then the whispers changed. They weren't just calling him. They were showing him things the shadows ahead twisted into. Shapes. A woman's figure. Her back turned. Her voice soft. You left me. It whispered. Jack froze. His chest tightened. You left me to die. The shadow hissed. His jaw tightened. He shook his head and muttered, You're not real. But the shadows didn't stop. Now the figure turned, and her face was pale, hollow-eyed, accusing. Jack's breath hitched, but he forced himself to look away and keep walking. The shadows screamed, but he didn't stop. After what felt like hours, the trees thinned slightly, and he stepped into a narrow path. He thought he was through the worst of it, until the ground beneath him split open. Jack barely had time to leap back as a massive creature burst from below, a nightmare of claws, scales, and burning yellow. Eyes dotted, let out a roar that shook the trees and lunged at him. Jack rolled to the side just in time. Feeling the wind of its jaws snap shut inches from his head, he sprang to his feet and drew his blade, its faint electric hum filling the air. The creature circled him, saliva dripping from its mouth. It lunged again, and Jack slashed. Sparks flew, and the beast howled. But it wasn't enough to stop it. He ran. The forest blurred around him as he dodged between trees, a creature crashing after him, tearing through roots and trunks like paper. At one point, it leapt ahead of him, cutting him off. Jack skidded to a halt, panting, his blade ready. The creature lowered its head, muscles coiling, and charged. Jack waited until the last possible moment, then threw himself at a low branch, swung up and over the creature as it slammed into the tree behind him. The impact shook the ground, and the beast let out a roar of pain and rage. Jack didn't wait to see if it recovered. He ran. The forest began to change again, the path ahead glowing faintly blue now. The trees grew taller, older, more silent. Finally, he burst into another clearing, but this one was strange. Perfectly round, silent. In the center stood a massive stone door, covered in alien markings that glowed faint gold. There was no way around it. He approached carefully. As soon as he stepped closer, the air grew warmer, and the markings shifted, forming words in his language. To leave this place, you must pay the price. Jack stared at the door. What price? He demanded. The golden letters rearranged. A memory. A piece of your soul. Jack's grip on the flower tightened. He thought of Lyra, of the baby, of the cruel doctor who turned them away. And then he thought of the shadow from earlier, the woman's voice accusing him. Slowly, he pressed his hand to the door. At once, a wave of pain and warmth surged through him. Memories flashed. A woman smiling at him, then screaming. Fire. Smoke. His hands reaching but too late. He gasped as the door absorbed the memory, and then it creaked open. Beyond it lay a winding tunnel of light. Jack stepped through. On the other side, the forest was quiet again, and the path ahead looked clear, but he didn't feel quite like himself anymore. He staggered, clutching the flower. His hands shook, but he kept moving. Behind him, the door slammed shut, a sound echoing like thunder. Somewhere in the distance, a faint light appeared, the edge of the forest. Jack's lips curved into a yaw. Grim smile. Almost there, he murmured. But then, movement. Not the beast from before, not vines. Something bigger. He turned just in time to see something step out from between the trees. A towering figure of black stone and fire, with eyes like molten gold. Spoke without moving its mouth. You do not belong. Jack gritted his teeth. Yeah, he said. I know. The figure raised a massive hand, and the ground split under Jack's feet. He leapt aside, rolled, and started running, every step taking him closer to the edge of the forest. Every. breath burning in his lungs. The figure followed, the earth shaking with its steps. Jack ducked under branches, jumped over roots, barely keeping ahead of it. Finally, he saw it, the first faint lights of the city. He burst out of the trees, stumbling into the open, the cold rain on his face again. The figure stopped at the edge of the forest. Unable to follow him out, Dot had watched him for a long moment, then slowly faded into the shadows. Jack stood there, panting, soaked, shaking. But a live Dot, and in his hand, still glowing softly, was the crystal flower. He looked back at the forest one last time and whispered, "Not so impossible after all." Then he turned and started walking toward the city, toward Lyra, toward Soren, and whatever came next. Asterisk the betrayal. The city lights glimmered ahead as Jack walked back, his boots heavy with mud and rain. Every muscle in his body ached. His shirt was torn, his hands were cut and bruised. But in his hand, he still clutched the crystal flower. It glowed faintly, as though alive, casting a soft light on his tired face. He thought of Lyra waiting in that broken corner of the market. He thought of Soren's tiny breaths, almost there. When? He finally reached the market. Dawn was just breaking, painting the sky a dull gray. Lyra was still there, sitting in the same spot, her baby bundled in her arms. When she saw him, her eyes widened. "You came back," she whispered. Barely believing it. Jack gave her a small smile and dropped to one knee in front of her. "Told you," he said simply. "Not leaving without this." He opened his hand and showed her the flower. Lyra's lips trembled. Her eyes filled with tears. You did it," she said. "You really did it." Jack nodded. "We need to get him to the clinic. The flower needs to be prepared properly." She stood quickly, holding Soren close, and they began walking toward the clinic together. But something felt wrong. Jack could feel it. The way people in the market stopped and stared at him. The way. Whispers rose behind them as they walked. And then 2 guards stepped into their path. The same ones from before. Their armor gleamed in the morning light. "Stop," one of them barked. Jack froze. Lyra clutched Soren closer. "Out of the way," Jack said evenly, but the second guard sneered. "You've stolen from the sacred forest. You've broken the law. You're under arrest." Jack's eyes narrowed. "Broken the law? I saved a child's life." "That flower is not yours to take," the first guard said. "You will come with us now." Behind them, more guards appeared. 6, 8, 10. Jack slowly handed the flower to Lyra and raised his hands. "Don't hurt her," he said quietly. 2 guards grabbed him roughly and pulled his arms behind his back. Lyra cried out, "Stop! He only did what no one else would. Let him go." The leader of the guards ignored her. "You'll stand trial," he told Jack coldly. "And when you're found guilty, and you will, you'll pay the price." They dragged him away. Lyra tried to follow, but one of the guards shoved her back, almost knocking her down. "Stay where you are, Zara," he snapped. She stood there, her baby crying softly in her arms, watching as Jack was pulled through the streets like a criminal. Her heart pounded in her chest. This wasn't right. This wasn't fair. For hours, Jack sat in a cold, dark cell. His hands were chained to the wall. Outside, he could hear footsteps, voices, laughter. Finally, the cell door opened, and the leader of the guards entered, accompanied by a tall alien with gold robes, a judge. The judge looked at him with disdain. "You've stolen from the sacred forest," the judge said. "You've trespassed where none are allowed. You've taken what does not belong to you. How do you plead?" Jack met his eyes. "Guilty," he said. "And I'd do it again," the judge sneered. "And you'll be executed at dusk." Jack said nothing. The guards left, locking the cell door behind them. Alone in the dark, Jack leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. He thought of Lyra's face, of Soren's tiny hands. He'd done what he came to do. If this was the price, so be it. But outside, Lyra wasn't sitting quietly. She stormed into the central square, clutching the flower in one hand and her baby in the other. The council chamber was full of high-born aliens in colorful robes, talking among themselves. When Lyra entered, they all fell silent. She stood in the middle of the room, her hair wet, her clothes torn, but her eyes blazing. "You all refused to help me," she said loudly. Murmurs rose in the chamber. "You all turned away when my son was dying. But a stranger, a human, risked his life to save him." A council member snorted. "He broke the law." Lyra stepped forward, holding up the flower. "He broke your law to save a life you would have let die. Is that justice? Is that mercy?" The room fell silent, but another council member stood slowly. "What do you ask of us, Zara?" Her voice shook, but she spoke clearly. "Free him," she said. "Free him, or let the whole city see what you really are." The council members looked at each other. Finally, the eldest among them stood. "Bring him here," he commanded. Moments later, Jack was dragged into the chamber. Still in chains, his eyes widened slightly when he saw Lyra standing there. "Are you doing?" He muttered. She met his gaze and said, "Finishing what you started." The eldest council member stared at Jack for a long time, then at the flower glowing in Lyra's hand. He sighed. "Release him," he ordered. The guards hesitated. "Do it," the elder barked. The chains fell from Jack's wrists. Jack rubbed his sore hands and looked at Lyra. "You didn't have to." "Yes," she interrupted. "I did." The council elder spoke again, his tone heavy with warning. "Leave this place, human, and take her with you. You are no longer welcome here." Jack gave a faint smirk. Wasn't exactly planning to stay. He turned to Lyra and held out his hand. She took it without hesitation, and together they walked out of the chamber, heads high, the flower still glowing softly between them. Behind them, the whispers of the council rose again, but neither of them looked back. The choice. The streets were silent. As Jack and Lyra walked out of the council chamber, no one stopped them, but everyone watched. Eyes followed them from windows, from alleys, from the shadows of market stalls. Some were curious. Some were angry. Some looked ashamed. Jack could feel the weight of their stares pressing on his back. But he didn't flinch. Lyra kept close beside him, clutching Soren in one arm and the glowing crystal flower in her other hand. When they reached the old clinic, they stopped. The same doctor who had turned her away days ago stood at the door. He saw them. He froze, his green skin paling. "We're here for the boy," Jack said simply. The doctor hesitated. Then he sniffed and stepped aside without a word. Inside, the clinic was quiet and cold. Jack helped Lyra lay Soren on a small table. The baby's breathing was faint now, each breath shorter than the last. Lyra's hands shook as she placed the crystal flower beside him. The doctor examined the flower carefully. Where did you find it?" he asked softly. "Where you wouldn't go," Jack replied. The doctor flinched at his words, but said nothing more. He began to grind the petals into a glowing paste, mixing it with drops of water. Lyra held her breath as he fed the medicine to Soren drop by drop. Minutes passed. Soren lay still. Lyra's tears slipped down her cheeks. "Please," she whispered. "Please, little star." Then a soft cry. Soren's tiny fists moved. His eyes fluttered open. The glow of the flower spread across his skin like faint starlight. Lyra gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Jack let out a slow breath and allowed himself a faint smile. "Told you," he murmured. "Not impossible." But outside, the silence had changed. The streets were no longer just watching. They were waiting. When Jack and Lyra stepped outside again, they found the square full of people. Hundreds of them, aliens of every kind, gathered in the gray. Morning light dot at the center stood the council members, robes bright against the dull crowd. The eldest council member raised his hand. Jack of Earth, he called, and Lyra of Zera. You have broken laws. You have shamed this council. But you have also reminded us of something we have forgotten. Jack narrowed his eyes. The elder continued. Our laws say the forest is forbidden. Our laws say the weak should be left behind. But today, he paused, looking at the glowing baby in Lyra's arms. We are forced to ask if our laws are just. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One council member shouted, the human must leave. He has no place here. Another countered, he saved a life when we would not. Voices rose, arguments breaking out across the square. Jack stood still, arms folded, watching them fight. Finally, the elder turned to him. Human, he said, you have a choice. Leave now, take her and the child, and never return, or stay and face the trial of the forest. Prove yourself not just to her, but to all of us. Jack raised an eyebrow. Trial of the forest? He asked. The elder nodded gravely. If you walk into the forest at dusk and survive until dawn, the council will honor you, and we will change the laws. The Zera will be treated as equals. Jack glanced at Lyra. Her face was pale, her hands tight on Soren. Don't, she whispered. You don't owe them anything. Let's just go. But Jack looked back at the crowd, at the whispers and the sneers and the shame. If I walk away, he said quietly, nothing changes. He took a breath and faced the elder. All right, he said. I'll do it. Gasps rose from the crowd. The elder's eyes widened slightly. You understand, he said. Most do not survive. The night. Jack's mouth curved into a faint smile. Then I'll be the first, he replied. Lyra grabbed his sleeve, tears in her eyes. Please, she begged. You've already done enough. Don't go back in there? You can't. Jack gently took her hand and placed the crystal flower, now dark and spent, into her palm. Keep him safe, he said softly. That's all that matters. Then he turned and walked toward the forest again. The crowd parted silently as he passed. All eyes fixed on him. At the edge of the forest, he stopped and glanced back one last time. Lyra stood there, holding Soren tightly, her eyes shining with tears and something else, something stronger. Hope. Jack gave her a faint nod. And he stepped into the shadows, and the forest swallowed him whole. Behind him, the council members exchanged uneasy glances. The crowd murmured. And Lyra raised her head high and said loudly, so everyone could hear, he is already more of us than any of you will ever be. The square fell silent. Somewhere deep in the forest, a faint growl echoed, and the trial began. Asterisk the change. Forest waited. Jack stood just inside its black gates as the sun sank behind the city walls. Behind him, the crowd still gathered at the edge of the square, holding their breath. Even from this distance, he could feel their fear, their doubt, and faintly, their hope. In Lyra's arms, Soren whimpered softly, his small hands now warm and alive. Jack didn't look back. He stepped deeper into the forest, and the darkness swallowed him whole. The trial of the forest was no myth. It began almost at once. The air thickened, and the ground beneath him shifted like water. The trees seemed to close in around him, whispering his name in dozens of voices. Jack, Jack, why are you here? He ignored them. A cold wind rushed through the branches, and the first shadow creature appeared, tall, faceless, and fast. It lunged at him, claws slashing. Jack ducked and drove his blade upward into its chest. The creature shrieked and dissolved into smoke. He kept moving, his breath heavy, but his resolve steady. Every hour, new horrors came. Walls of fire that forced him to run through searing heat, rivers of black water filled with glowing serpents, and creatures that wore the faces of people he had lost. They all spoke the same thing. You don't belong here. You can't save them. You'll die like the rest. And every time Jack answered the same way, pushing forward, teeth gritted, fists clenched. Then I'll die trying. At one point, he stumbled into a clearing filled with mirrors. Each mirror showed him something different. His failures, his regrets, his weakest moments. In one, he saw himself running away as the woman from his past screamed his name. He stopped, breathing hard, staring at the reflection. Then he smashed the mirror with his fist and kept walking. Outside the forest, the crowd waited all night. At first, they whispered. Then they fell quiet. Hours passed. The moon climbed high. Lyra stood at the very front, her eyes fixed on the tree line, her arms tight around Soren. Some began to say he wouldn't return. No one survives the trial, one muttered. He's already gone, said another. But Lyra shook her head. He'll come back, she said quietly. Inside, Jack's strength was fading. His body was bruised, his hands bloody. The blade he carried was cracked and dull now, yet he kept moving. Finally, just as the first pale light of dawn began to touch the horizon, he reached the heart of the forest. Here, the trees formed a vast circle, and in the center stood a great stone figure, the Guardian. Its body was carved from black rock, its eyes molten gold. It spoke in a voice like thunder. You have come far, human, but you have nothing left. Give up. Jack stood there, chest heaving, face pale. Not a chance, he said hoarsely. The Guardian raised its arms, and the ground cracked open at Jack's feet. But Jack didn't run. He stepped forward into the circle and dropped his broken blade. You want me to give something? He called out. Fine. Take everything. Just let them live free. The Guardian paused. You would give your life? It rumbled. Jack met its gaze. If that's what it takes, he said. For a long moment, the Guardian stared at him. Then it lowered its arms. The cracked ground sealed. The whispers stopped, and the Guardian spoke one last time. You have passed? Then it shattered into dust. The forest began to change. The black trees faded into green. The air grew warm and clean. The sun rose fully over the horizon. Outside, the crowd gasped. The first golden rays of dawn struck the forest, and for the first time in living memory, the trees glowed faintly green instead of black. And then a figure emerged. Jack, bloody, exhausted, but alive. He walked slowly into the square, his boots dragging through the dust, his head held high. The crowd fell silent. Lyra ran forward, tears streaming down her face. Jack looked at her, and despite everything, he smiled faintly. Told you, he said, his voice hoarse. She threw, her arms around him, holding him tight, her baby between them. Behind them, the council elder stepped forward, his face pale. You did it, he said quietly. Jack looked up at him, his eyes hard. Now keep your promise, he said. The elder swallowed, then turned to the crowd. From this day, he announced loudly, the Zera shall be treated as equals, and the human is honored as a brother of our world. At first, there was silence. Then someone began to clap. Then another. Soon the square was filled with cheers, loud and rising, echoing through the city. Jack stood there, letting the sound wash over him, his arms still around Lyra and Soren. And for the first time in a long time, he felt whole. Later, that day, the council offered him riches, a place of power, anything he wanted. Jack just shook his head. Just take care of them, he said simply, nodding toward Lyra and the baby. Then he turned to Lyra and smiled faintly. Guess I've got somewhere to be, he murmured. She took his hand. Stay, she said softly. You belong here now. Jack looked around, at the people watching him with respect instead of fear, at the forest now bright with life, at the tiny child who reached out to grab his finger, and for the first time, he didn't feel like running anymore. Yeah, he said, maybe I do. He crouched down, letting Soren clutch his finger, and whispered, looks like we all get a second chance. Above them, the morning sun shone brighter than it had in years, and in the heart of the four city, a human, a Zara, and a child stood together. Proof that even in the darkest of places, one act of courage can change everything.